Okay, SAE size, scope, responsibilities. Let's go to the placement portion of this application. That's what I'm talking about here. If you're on a placement application, or if you're on an application where you're considering some of each, 50, 50, 60, 40, whatever your percentage may be, to get the full points. And this is a big piece of a proficiency application that is straight placement, all right? 32 points. Includes, to get all the points, include a complete SAE description, size, scope, responsibility, or hours and income, and show significant growth. You've heard that word a couple of times in here already, in diversification, responsibilities, or hours, income, engagement over time. So, Brendan, can you show that sample application that you, or maybe it's on the next page of this. There you go. Yep. All right. So some of you have seen different ways to do this. Excuse me. Some of you have seen different ways to do this, and you may have your own philosophical thoughts about it. And I want to cover two pieces and see if I can make things more clear. But the most important part about this portion of the application is to be specific with the student's responsibilities and whether the hours were paid or unpaid. Now, you might think, okay, now hang on. On the essay questions earlier, you specifically asked how my roles and responsibilities have changed. So what's the difference? That was in story form on an opportunity in 5 or 6 lines or sentences to tell a story about how they changed. This allows you to show year to year specifically what your tasks and responsibilities were. So if I work at a nursery, if I work as the ag education intern in my high school, if I work at a hardware store, if I work on a poultry operation, if I work at a vet clinic, wherever I work, I first want to list the employer and where I work. All right, I work at the Madison County Veterinary Clinic. I work at Kent Benson Hardware Store or sheep operation. He's a pretty difficult boss. I don't think I'd work for him, but if I did, okay, Benson sheep operation would be this part that's bolded. I would make sure that you know that that's where I work. And then what were my responsibilities? Feeding, watering. Maybe the first year I fed and watered and monitored health. If I noticed any visual signs of an animal sick, I was to notice that and go report back to Mr. Benson. Okay? By year 2, I was getting to make some decisions. I continued to feed and water. If I noticed some pretty basic health issues, maybe I could handle those. And by year 3, maybe I'm giving vaccinations and making genetic decisions. So don't just get a really well-written, well-done description and then copy and paste it into every year. That's fine, but the student's going to really suffer on points at a place where they're asking for growth of responsibility. Okay? Paid and unpaid hours. That sounds pretty basic and pretty simple, but I want to cover something here. If the student truly did not make any money, it's an unpaid internship, then all the hours go in unpaid. If they did get paid $8, $10, $12 an hour, whatever it may be, then you put that many hours in paid and put what they earn. Okay? Expenses in a placement SAE. There's an opportunity here to list current expenses. What might expenses be if I don't own the operation? All right, if I work on Mr. Benson's sheep operation, and I'm responsible for feeding and watering every day, do I have to put the feed bill for the farm? Most likely not. If he made me buy the feed for his sheep, that's really not a fair setup at all. So the operation may have had expenses. This is what the student spent out. In most placement applications, it's likely that there's probably not much in the way of expenses. What might they be? If my employer says, hey, you've got to have steel-toed boots to work here, and I don't provide those. So you may have had to go out and buy a $100 pair of boots. You may have to provide your own gloves or safety glasses. So there could be some expenses related to your placement SAE, but they need to be related to the SAE. All right, not in year 2, while working on this poultry operation, I saved my money and I bought my own laptop. That doesn't belong here. This is related to, unless they use it for this SAE, I bought my own laptop so that I could keep up with the online records. Again, in which case I would think that the facility would provide that, but if they didn't, if they said, hey, you eventually need to have your own technology to help us keep up with automated feeding or whatever, then you'll have to buy that. These are related to the SAE, money that the student actually spent out of their pocket. Can some of the hours be paid and unpaid? They can. They can. That is not uncommon. Something that some of you have gotten used to doing. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong at all. I want to walk through this with you. You see this entry. Everything is in paragraph form. Year one, get to the point, research. For this year's project, I need to explore. It's all in one paragraph form. Some of you have gotten to where you might have listed as multiple entries. Get to the point, or where the title is for one entry in 2014, Benson sheep operation, feeding lambs, 20 hours. A separate line, still year one, Benson sheep operation, watering lambs or tagging lambs. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong about that. I'm going to tell you there are some judges that, if you're not really clear, can really start to question, really, you keep up with the exact amount of hours, you do every little task. So I would be cautious about that. Or I still think that's probably not necessarily a bad way to go. When you sit down with the student, if they're doing a really good job of keeping up with their records and the time that they work, if you think, okay, I can document that about a third of my time I spend maintaining lawnmowers, and about a third of my time I spend developing marketing material to promote the business, and then the other third is actually mowing yards or weed eating yards. So maybe you feel comfortable saying, I know I worked a total of 2,000 hours, and I'm going to put a third here, a third here, and a third there. If you and the student can genuinely feel good about being able to report that, then that is certainly a way to, task by task, list those out specifically. Why would I do that? If I choose to go that route, because I'm going to use more space and can give a whole lot more detail to this part of the application that's worth, in these placement applications, almost a third of the points. Any questions? Have I lost anybody there? Does that make sense?
I think, what Mr. Lastly says is about the expenses. That is not actually that uncommon, especially, we tell people that if a student has a beef project, let's say, and in their mind, this beef project is theirs, okay? But mom and dad pays for everything. They've paid for the heifer, they pay for the feed, whatnot. We tell them this really truly becomes a placement project, okay? But then the student in the application puts down all the expenses. So now they've got it jumbled up in their mind, it's a placement project, but they're claiming the expenses and there's no income. And so, they're going in the hole. And so they've kind of combined it, got it jumbled up. And so we've got to separate that back out. This is a placement project. They are working for mom and dad by growing out this heifer, training this heifer. They do have the luxury of being able to show the heifer, and that's great. Okay. So it may be just an unpaid work experience, but you can't include those expenses into the project. And we see that, and actually I say, this is not a good job. And remember, we need to teach business sense. When we talk about the budgets, when we need to talk about hours, we're supposed to be talking about ag business practices and developing sound business decisions, And if you are working for someone and it really looks like you're going in the hole, that's not a good job. You know, that's not a sound business decision. And so we got to keep that in mind, because when you look at an application, it discredits it when there's a lot of expenses and it's a job. The other thing I was going to say is sometimes it becomes unclear when a student has paid and unpaid hours, even though it's legit, you can do it. But sometimes we, you know, if a student, let's say, starts to volunteer at a vet clinic or an animal shelter, you see the hours that are unpaid, and then it transitions, that child's doing a good job, and they decide, hey, we need to be paying this student because they're doing a dang good job, and they're responsible and they're respectful and they really follow through on things. So then it transitioned into a paid position. That makes a lot of sense when you look at the application.
Yeah, I would echo that. I want to clarify something, that I want to come to Ms. Carr's question about earning money. So a student, if you decide to list some hours as paid and some as unpaid, list them in two different entries, and you better be real specific as to why some are paid and some are unpaid, because that will cause those judges to think, now wait a minute, how do you decide, who decides, and is this just a random arrangement? I want to go back to the question in the chat was, does a student that earns no money look worse compared to a student that does earn money if they're in the same category? I completely agree with what Mr. Benson just said. However, I would say that depends a little bit on the setup and what the student is doing. Okay, but whether you philosophically agree with this anymore or not, the way these proficiency awards have been shaped the last few years and where they're headed now, money and scope are not the complete driving force as much as the experience and the growth. And so, yes, it's great to show money and financial management, okay? But is a student just automatically out if they truly have earned nothing? Now, I can tell you, no, the answer is no, but I can tell you, Ms. Carr, that it's going to look a little bit odd if over a 3, 4, 5 year period I continue to do all these things, and I've worked hundreds, maybe thousands of hours, and have gotten zero money. I'm not saying that's an absolute no, but there really need to be some pretty good rationale as to why, because that just doesn't seem reasonable. An obvious exception, maybe it's a family operation. Maybe I work at home and mom and dad provide a vehicle, and they take care of, you know, other things. I don't have to work or worry for a lot there. Obviously, at home they feed me and take care of me, and I don't pay rent. So maybe on a family operation, and there might be other exceptions as well, but it could start to look a little bit curious to a judge if there are hundreds and maybe thousands of hours worked over multiple years, and the student has not earned a dime. That could really cause some questions for a judge. Always ask work-based learning. I've always allowed work-based learning placements to count as SAEs. Do not see a problem. Am I okay with doing that? Sometimes they work unpaid, but are hired the weekends for the same employer. I'm not going to say as a blanket statement that's allowed or not allowed. I think, Mr. Surratt, it depends on what they're doing. And so I think I understand your question. If it's the work-based learning part during the school day, maybe they're not getting paid, but maybe they're being paid on the weekend by the same employer. That makes sense, I guess. I don't want to blanketly say that all work-based learning works. There's got to be obviously some agricultural tie to it. Then I certainly think that could potentially work. To replace on the application to include trade-offs instead of income, like vehicle, food, clothes. Yes, great question, Caroline. What I wanted to get into was what Mr. Benson mentioned earlier, and I don't want to disagree or contradict him. Livestock projects, and I know that they're just a small part of what we do. Some of you, they matter a whole lot, and some of you think, let's talk about something besides livestock, because that's not me. So I want to talk about livestock for a minute. If that does not include you, you want to mute me, that's fine. But if you do, this can get a little bit gray. The fact is, it is really, really hard if you're to make any money if you're truly only raising and showing a couple of livestock animals every year. It's a great project. I love it. I did it growing up. I love showing livestock. I think it's a great thing for students to do. It's possible. It's possible to make money, but it's really hard. So oftentimes, I get it, the student does not maybe pay for that animal. Somebody else does, right? Or it's a lease of some kind. And so the student may or may not even have their own feed bill cost. Maybe somebody else is taking care of that. Caroline, I'm going to answer your question. I'm not running away from you. I'm going to connect several dots here, so hang with me. So if that student is in possession of and truly manages, if that's their animal, they just didn't pay cash for it. The right answer is that's still an entrepreneurship that they didn't buy. You can work for your family's operation, and maybe you train and work with a lot of animals. Where that's going to get a little bit gray, and even beyond Georgia, where if we turn that in for an American degree or proficiency and say, hey, I'm in swine production with my 2 to 3 show hogs. I didn't buy them, so they're placement. Well, they've been your hogs that entire show season. Maybe somebody else paid cash for them and you didn't. So I would just be careful. That doesn't look as much like placement as me working on my family's hog operation. And because of that, I get to show some pigs. That's a little bit different. Dairy is another one that obviously is easy to get into, that being really placement because you didn't ever actually buy or own the animal. But I would just be cautious about saying, well, look, it's a lot easier to count my hours in livestock. And I put a lot of hours into that animal, but I'm going to lose money. Well, just be cautious about thinking that that's all placement. That's your animal day to day. So what sparked me to that was coming back to what Caroline asked. So bartering is completely legitimate. There is a place on the application in the entrepreneurship portion of an application. Okay. You go into the entrepreneurship portion of an application on the expense page. There's a place to list barter transfer, and then a place to show cash and non-cash expenses. Okay, if somebody else bought that zero-turn mower for me, this is not exclusive to livestock. It happens a lot with livestock. If somebody else bought my zero-turn mower for me, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, wasn't a straight gift. It could be a gift. There's a way to show that. But maybe they say, look, we know you're trying to grow from mowing 3 to 4 lawns a month to 20. And you need more than you in a push mower. You need 2 helpers and some zero-turn mowers. We'll provide the money up front to do that. You mow our place for free, and you clean the swimming pool, and you don't get paid anything for those things. So you put a dollar value on that mower and a dollar value on the work that you provide to whomever, your neighbor, your parents, whatever. That barter is a non-cash expense. You paid for it. You didn't pay cash. Okay, because the time you put into mowing their yard for free, you could have been making money somewhere else. The time you put into cleaning their pool or feeding their animals, you could have been doing something else, but you did that to pay off a cash expense you didn't have the cash to buy. Maybe you got your own hay operation, but you don't show that you own a tractor. Well, somehow that hay's got to be harvested. You own the land, you don't own the equipment. Your neighbor has equipment, and they let you borrow it at no cost. Maybe you're helping them bale, and they don't pay you, but you use their tractor, their baler, whatever the case may be. So, Caroline, the long answer to your question, connecting back to something Mr. Benson was talking about, yes, on an entrepreneurship application, there's a place to list. They're not called trade-offs, they're barters, where I would barter an exact expense, and it becomes a transfer barter at one place, and a couple of lines later, it's a non-cash expense to offset that. So, does that make sense? Is that more confusing? I'm not trying to directly contradict what Mr. Benson's saying. He's not wrong. I would just say be very, very careful there. Anybody that shows livestock, if truly what that student has is 1 or 2 animals a show season, that's going to be pretty difficult to believe as placement. That's your animal.
But Ben, this is something I think that really kind of goes back to what we talked about when we started today about SAE projects that are great projects. And yes, it's good to have kids do a proficiency application because it kind of charts their progress and keeps track of their hours and their skills but maybe they aren't the strongest applications truly to be state winners or national winners.
Correct.
Also, when you get into that.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, listen, again, I love showing livestock. I think it's great. If truly my SAE is 1 to 2 to 3 show pigs a show season, in most years, am I going to truly do well in the swine proficiency with 1 to 2 to 3 show pigs a year? Probably not. And that's not a deterrent. That doesn't mean they shouldn't apply. There's still great skill and lesson learned in record keeping, financial management, turning in an application. That's not what and there may be a year when that does win. Most likely, that's probably not going to win a proficiency. It is a good SAE, but I would begin with the end in mind. I would say to that student, that's how you want to get started. That's a great way to hourly keep up with skills and money. Eventually, if we want to be state star, if we want to get the state degree, qualifying, you're going to have earned some money. You're going to have some hours, and you can't double dip. When I own those animals, when I truly own them, I don't get to show the finances of owning them and the hours worked with them. Placement and entrepreneurship there are separate. I can show that I work for my uncle's hog operation and the hours I work there, and then I own my own. But I don't get to say I had my 3 show pigs, I earned this much money with them, and I worked this many hours. If it's entrepreneurship, it's entrepreneurship. You don't count the hours, which is why Mr. Benson is mentioning what he's mentioning. So help that student understand that from the beginning. And if it means you start this way and then eventually grow to meet the goals, that's what you're going to have to do. I hope that makes sense and was not too confusing.